you might see a lot of shady stuff, but like, you don't need to tell your parents. It's totally fine. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Trope Talk. Today, we're talking about the YA trope, I don't need to tell my parents, I've got this totally under control. So that's our topic for today.
Which looks a lot different when you actually are a parent.
It does, yeah. I mean, when you're like 16, 17 in real life, you really do think that you know everything and you have everything under control. And like, I don't want to tell them because then they'll stop me from visiting my vampire boyfriend's vampire family. And like, I got it under control, it's fine. So, you know, it makes a lot more sense when you're not on the parental side for sure.
Yeah, because, you know, I remember that, you know, 15, 16, 17, mom and dad don't know anything, they don't understand. But now that I'm a mom, I'm like, oh no, they understood. They were just smart and I was stupid. Which is not to imply that teenagers are stupid, but the decisions that I made when I was a teenager were pretty stupid. But that said, yeah, YA books, and like, it's this theme that even some of my YA followers have said that, you know, it is sort of desensitizing, because after a while you start to accept the fact that this really bad decision this kid made is totally normal and you don't have to tell your parents about anything.
Yeah.
So things that I've noticed is either we kill the parents so we don't have to worry about the parents, or they're really terrible, horrible parents that don't parent at all, or they're these super chill, cool, laid back parents that don't care about anything. I'm like, I don't think any of those are really realistic in the point that okay, this teenager now has everything under control and they can do everything and they make all these decisions and bam, life turns out perfectly. Like,
well, it's funny because as you were saying that, I could think just right off the top of my head, I could think of an example of each of those. Like the killing off the parents is classic Disney move, especially for the mother, right? And then the parent who just has no clue what's going on. This isn't exactly a YA book, but the first thing that came to my mind is the movie E.T. Like she literally has an alien in her house and just doesn't notice it. And then for the third example, the just super chill parents, the first thing I think of is Bella Swan's dad, because he kind of just lets her do her own thing, even though she's clearly like moody and going through something. He just gives her space, maybe a little too much space. He's a cool dad. And I appreciate that he was giving her space, but maybe he should have been a little more proactive to figure out exactly what it was that was happening with her. Just as a teen who at one point had a not so healthy relationship going on, and my parents did the same thing. They gave me space, they trusted me, and I really probably could have used some solid parental advice and guidance that I didn't get because they just trusted me. And it all worked out, but not without a lot of painful experiences in between. From a storytelling perspective, this just occurred to me. I can understand why this is a trope for YA because if you think about even the hero's journey, there's a part in the, like, I don't know, whoever's watching this, I don't know how familiar you are with the hero's journey story structure, but one of the classic elements of that story structure is at some point you have to separate the hero from the mentor figure so that the hero is forced to face the challenges on their own. And so I think that that's why this trope exists in YA, because it really makes the stakes feel higher. It makes the character growth a lot more intense and concentrated whenever they are facing it on their own. But there's got to be a way to do that without promoting this idea to teens that you shouldn't tell your parents when something really big is happening to you. Which is what I think is the subtle message behind that trope. Like you mentioned, like it's not exactly healthy life advice for teenagers to just, it's fine. We got this, vampire battle or science fiction, alien invasion, whatever it is. We've got it under control and it's fine. That may not be the best choice.
Like even in some of my books, you know, the parents might be absent or they might be bad parents, but I try really hard to incorporate how that makes the main character struggle by not having parents in the picture. Because realistically, some parents are horrible. They're awful and they do terrible things. And that might make it easier for these kids to say, well, I've got it under control. I'm going to go do what I want to do. As long as it plays into the story and it's like a character building theme, I'm fine with that. But if it's just like, well, we're just going to kill the parents because we don't know what to do with the parents, and then the kid can go do whatever they want, and they're totally over their parents' death in like 3 chapters, that bugs me. Like, I don't like it.
That's a good point, because I feel like if the parents' death was like the inciting incident that pushed the character forward into the challenge, like the motivating factor for their growth throughout the story, then I think I would be okay with that, because at least we're acknowledging that the parents' absence is something that the character is grieving over. I think when it becomes a problem for me is when it's just treated kind of flippantly, like mom and dad have no clue what's going on, and we're not going to, we don't even think about telling them, because we know if we do tell them, they wouldn't understand, and they're going to lock us, like ground us, and not let us go to this super dangerous thing that we're trying to do. So I feel like that, just while it's very relatable to teens, it's a heightened version of real conflict between parents and teens. I'm not sure that it is communicating a positive message to the teens. What I would like to see, and again, I'm going to talk about this from a thematic perspective real quick and not a storytelling perspective, because I know from a storytelling perspective, it's problematic to have the parents there all the time. Because then how do you get your character really into conflict other than relational conflict with their parents? But from a thematic perspective, I think it's problematic to set this standard for teens that you don't need to tell your parents when something is going wrong. I mean, that's the opposite of the social awareness campaigns that are happening now. Like, if you see someone being bullied, or if you're being bullied, tell someone. Or if you if you see anything that might be human trafficking, tell someone. And yet in these books, we're communicating the exact opposite, which is, you might see a lot of shady stuff, but like, you don't need to tell your parents. It's totally fine. You can handle it.
It's okay.
You and your gang of other teenagers are fully equipped to handle this. And I know this happens in like contemporary YA romances too, but I'm mostly thinking of like fantasy, sci-fi. And in those stories, the teens are usually equipped with some sort of special ability. But that doesn't remove the reality that they probably, unless their parents really are evil or in some way, like realistically going to stand in the way of good and what needs to be done, there's really not a good reason not to tell your parents that there is an evil henchman chasing you. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet it's perpetuating this false reality to teens that everything is going to work out fine if you just try to handle this yourself. And sometimes it's done comically, and that's fine. But in a lot of books, it seems like it's just something that's kind of flippantly thrown in there that, the parents just aren't involved in the situation at all. And the teens handle everything on their own, and it all works out fine in the end. But, theoretically, I'm reading a book series, and I don't want to call it out by name because I don't want to like throw anybody under the bus. It's an okay series. It's been entertaining, but these literally are teens who are saving not one world, but 2, pretty much on their own, because they don't know which adults they can trust. And at least that's a realistic scenario. But people die in this book series. Like,
I was thinking of one too.
At least in this series, it's not entirely painted as a positive, everything is fine. Like, but then there also hasn't been this turnaround of finding adults that they can trust to help them. It's kind of like they still don't trust the grownups because they don't know who's on what side and whether they're gonna, so I think there's a lot of responsibility as a YA author, I think, because it's definitely different being a parent who writes YA. Because I'm thinking like,
we're thinking, what would I want my child to do in this situation?
Yeah, and my kids are still young. My oldest
the story.
Yeah, my oldest daughter's only 10, but she's just now getting to that age where I screen them first, but I let her read some YA stuff, like stuff that is appropriate for her. Yeah. Because her reading level is advanced, and so she's bored with the books for kids her age. And so I have to think about that as a parent. Like, there's even some books that I've written that I don't let her read because there's just too much romance. And I'm like, you're 10. I don't really want you like thinking too much about that yet. But as a parent writing YA, I have to think about this. Like, I believe that what we consume, what we take in, what we put into our mind and hearts shapes how we see the world. It shapes who we are. So what, as an author, am I putting out there for teens to consume, and how is it shaping them? Assuming that people actually buy my books and read them.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking of a series and then a movie that I'm ashamed to say I don't know if it actually started as a book or not, but the movie Red Dawn was all about teenagers. I mean, it was just a bunch of kids who were trying to survive an invasion. The remake movie was pretty good too, and I thought that the way they handled it was really well, because most kids are not going to have their stuff their junk together enough to be able to even not get captured in an invasion. But the fact that they went through their grief cycle, they had lost parents, they had lost friends, and then they just kind of decided, well, we're just going to sit back and be destroyed. So they did what kids do. They fought back. And I thought that was handled really well, because it was realistic, that human desire to fight back when you're being oppressed, no matter how old you are. So I thought that was a really good example of teenagers kind of saving the world, for lack of a better term. But then also the series I just finished reading, the Illuminae files, it's teenagers who basically stop this. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but they have to stop this big corporation from like complete mass genocide that they're trying to do. And throughout the whole thing, like, the adults in their lives keep second guessing their abilities, and they keep proving them wrong time and time again. But the thing that I liked about it was that the way it was written never once gave the idea that you don't need parents, you don't need adults, you can do everything you want. Everything they did was based on something that they had learned from a parent, or that they were doing for their parents. And it was really cool how they handled this dynamic between all the adults who are in charge and think the kids don't know anything, versus the kids who know a lot more than the adults want to give them credit for, and how they kind of overcame that. And I liked the way, the story sort of interweaved between the adults and the kids. And ultimately they kind of needed each other to like I said, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I like the way they handled that in those books too. So I think it definitely can be done to have parents written into the YA books from the beginning to the end without needlessly slaughtering mom and dad for like no reason other than to just get rid of them. I mean, I've done that, but I've tried to only do it in the sense where it motivates the character, or it is a pivotal moment that changes something for the character. And I can appreciate that in just about any book. But I've read some YA books that I've had to put them down, because I'm like, no good parent is going to just let their child traipse around with random paranormal things in the backyard and just be totally fine with it. I think it can be done really well. And I wish more YA books did include the parents from the beginning through the end, because it does give a more realistic sort of view on life that oftentimes you can't get through to adulthood without your parents guiding you and helping you. And if they're totally hands off, then chances are you're going to either not make it through adulthood, or you're not going to be prepared for some of the stuff that adulthood's going to bring.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think some of the best YA series that I've read have been ones where, as the character gets drawn more into the dangerous world, whatever, like the paranormal world or whatever it is that they are discovering exists, the parents are part of that. Maybe they were already part of the world and hadn't told the kid. Like, I've read lots of variations of that.
Yeah.
But there's still an opportunity for the kid to have to make their own way, because they and the parents may disagree on something, or they may know information that the parents don't, or, there's lots of ways to do that without completely removing the parent-teen relationship from the story. One series that does that pretty well, I think, is The Moral Instruments, because the main character maintains a relationship with her mother, and her, I guess I'll call it like the surrogate dad, like the guy who her mother had. It's almost like an uncle figure who's always been there. And it turns out that the parents already knew about the paranormal world, but had intentionally kept it from her because they were hoping to keep her safe and out of it. And so, at least in that dynamic, she goes off and does stuff kind of on her own, and then realizes her parents already know about it. and so then the dynamic shifts a little bit, and the world kind of opens up, where she realizes that a lot of the grown-ups are already involved, and they're able to kind of face things together, even though there's a way in which she has to kind of do stuff on her own, because she has, like, there are certain roles that she can play that her mom can't. And at one point her mom gets, like, separated from her. And so there's still, the tropes are still at play, where again, the hero's journey, you've got to kind of pull the mentor figure out and make them do it on their own. Yeah. But it was pulled off without feeling like I don't need my parent at all, So I think there's a way to do it. And not to say that teens are incapable, because that's another message that I wouldn't want to come across in YA. I'd want to instill the confidence, the belief in teens that they can make a difference. They do have something to offer. But without the dangerous edge of, let's just not tell anybody and go do this on our own. I think there's got to be a middle place that you can arrive at. And again, the needs of a story are going to kind of dictate what makes sense and what doesn't. And if you're killing off the parents, like you said, you've done it. I've done it and would do it again. But it has to make sense. Do it again. Yeah, but it has to make sense for the story, and it has to be a motivational factor, like a transformative experience for the character, so that at least it carries the gravity of it. Like, to me, that's not the same as devaluing the parent relationship, where you're just like, I'm just not going to tell them because they don't need to know. That's different.
Yeah. I don't, it's very different. Like, I've read lots of books where the parents just were already passed away, or one of them was for one reason or another, and it is a motivational thing for the child, or not necessarily a motivational thing, but it's impacted their lives enough where, the relationship with the remaining parent has been closer, and they've been more open and honest. And to me, it felt like it flowed more naturally, and it was more believable when this teen went off and did the things that he or she needed to do, and then always had that person to come back to, to feel comforted, or to be encouraged, instead of spiraling into depression or insanity because they're trying to do all of this stuff on their own. That, let's be honest, of course teenagers are not stupid, of course they have a lot to offer, but there is a lot to be said for the wisdom that comes with age. Not to say that all of us get smart when we grow up, but sometimes just the number of life experiences that you have makes the difference too. So I like it when there's a parent that's at least still, like, somewhere in the background, like you were just talking about with the Mortal Instruments, where there's there is that parent to go back to, or parental figure at least to go back to.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be their parent.
Yeah.
If their parents are just horrible, at least maybe if they can find like some adult that they trust that is actually a good person and not planted in the story to betray them later, right? Because again, then that communicates that adults just can't be trusted, which is not a great message to send teens who might at some point actually struggle with something in life that they really should go to an adult about. So that's,
You know what I like to write and what I like to read are where the main character that's a teenager and the parents maybe don't have the best relationship. But over the progression of the book, you start to see them grow closer and start to understand, why mom and dad are the way that they are. Because I think that happens a lot in life too. Like teenagers may not really understand, well, why won't mom let me stay out past midnight? I'm just going to a party at a friend's house. Well, maybe mom has her reasons. Maybe mom has experienced parties after midnight at a friend's house and doesn't want you to go through that same.
Maybe that's when the vampires come out.
Yeah. And, we have to remember too that parents are still people. Sometimes we have difficulty expressing our feelings, emotions, opinions. If we went through something traumatic and we don't want our child to go through that same thing, but it's not necessarily something that's easy to talk about with our children, it might come out as oppression or just like the screaming parent who won't let you do anything, but actually has a really solid reason and really just ultimately just needs to figure out how to express that to the child. So I like books that do that, where there's growth with not just the main character, but also with the parents, and the relationship gets closer, a little bit more dynamic. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but I can't think of one like that just off the top of my head. But you read a lot where the teen and the parent sort of spiral apart from each other by the end of the book. But I kind of like it when an author can bring them a little bit closer together, which happens in contemporary than like fantasy, because I think parents.
It happens a little bit in the Hunger Games trilogy, because when the books start, the mom is she's there, but she's absent.
She's disconnected, yeah.
And then as the books go on, Katniss comes to understand more about her mom's grief, and like they sort of like it's never quite completely repaired, but they at least have some growth where they're able to kind of understand each other, and the mom becomes a little more active and engaged, so it doesn't make a full transformation necessarily, but you definitely see growth in the mom throughout the series. She doesn't just remain this like static cardboard character. She's still not immensely likable, but at least you see growth in her, and you see the effort put in to kind of rebuild the relationship. But it's definitely not that way in all YA books.
No.
I think when you said parents are also people, I think that might be kind of the key, because when they're written as props, like props that you just kind of like mention because it would be unrealistic for them not to exist, but then you just like shove them out of the picture. I think that's when it starts to feel like the treatment of the parent-child relationship is like just flippant, like it's
trivial, like it's not as strong. Because I like to, like, when I write contemporary YA, I really like to have situations where the main character is actually going to their parents for advice, because I mean the truth of it is most teenagers would go to their parents for advice about things. I mean, if I did. Maybe I'm generalizing here, but
I didn't a whole lot, but
because I think some people are afraid to, come and ask their parents about the big things. I want my daughter to know that no matter what it is, you will not be in trouble for coming to ask me for guidance about something. If you do it on your own and totally screw it up, you're probably going to get in some trouble. But I won't be mad if you're coming for advice. And I think that that's a realistic thing that you need to put when you're writing YA, because there are lots of kids that do. And I would hate for kids who do that to feel like they're not cool, or they're not, on the right side of things, because they do have a relationship with their parents that they value. So I try to be really careful when I write contemporary YA that I include at least one parent who's a good sounding board for advice, and who is a disciplinarian but is reasonable and kind of has that relationship with the child, because I don't know, just because I like it mainly, but because that's the way I want my daughter to feel in our relationship.
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking back to my YA, and the YA contemporary that I wrote, they were in college, so the parents just were around, so it was easy to just not address the parents because they just weren't there.
Yeah, which is typical in college. I mean, usually your parents aren't there. So,
and then, but I still tried. I tried when I was writing that to make sure that I wasn't advocating any kind of like ridiculously dangerous behavior. And then the YA fantasy series that I wrote, the Arameth series, again, for various reasons, most of the parents just aren't there because they're some of them are dead from previous events, and that is a motivational factor. Some of them are evil, and some of them are just not there because they're in a different world. I do, later in the series, because I don't want to give any spoilers, but there is like a father-daughter relationship, a couple of father-daughter relationships. Mm-hmm. And I tried not to make any parents except maybe one that is like a fringe parent, that were just straight up evil, because I don't think that happens very often, that you just have a like horribly evil parent who doesn't care about their child. Like they usually have, maybe their motivations are really screwed up because they have their own issues and they don't realize that they're hurting their child, but usually they believe that they're doing the right thing as a parent, usually. And so I wanted to be realistic while also doing what the story needed, because the story, it wouldn't have made sense to have a bunch of parents there just following everybody around. In the new series that I'm writing, the Leyward Stones, I'm doing the exact opposite. Like her poor dad gets sucked into this mess with her from the beginning. So that's one of
the things I like about it.
It's a new thing for me. It's a different dynamic to explore, because I was plotting out the latest chapter I was writing, and I'm sitting there going, now I have to think about how the dad would be. Like, I can't just think about her reaction. Like, her dad is there too. So what would he do? What would he say? Like, he can't just forget that he's there.
Let her do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, your child just wander off to certain death. I mean.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, because Lena is definitely gonna. I mean, it's a YA fantasy, a YA paranormal. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she's going to have to face things on her own at some point in the series. But having him there, having him involved and present, introduces a different dynamic for me to explore as an author than what I've written before, because he isn't part of the world. So he's figuring things out as she is, like alongside her almost. So it's an interesting dynamic to kind of manipulate and try to maintain as I'm writing the series. But I hope it's working. I think it's working.
Yeah, that just actually made me think of something too a minute ago with writing realistic relationships too, is that one thing that I never want to do is write a relationship that comes across as a healthy relationship when it's not.
Oh, yeah.
There are lots and lots of parent-child relationships that are very bad. And I want to always kind of try to make sure that I'm writing healthy relationships, so that if anyone picks up my book and reads it who is in the middle of a very bad parental-child relationship, that they can identify that.
Yeah.
That this is the way a relationship between a parent and child should be. Healthy boundaries, open communication. Of course, teenagers are going to go off and do what they want sometimes. Like, that's part of growing. But there also has to be an equal and reasonable response by the parent. And I think that's a good thing to portray, because if you're not portraying those healthy relationships, then someone who's in an unhealthy relationship wouldn't necessarily realize it. I would never want someone to pick up my book and think that this bad situation that they're in is the way that life just is, because that's how a YA book is written.
Like, well, and that's a good point, because as
you need to be able to see that.
As a kid, as a teen, the way you're raised, your home life is normal to you. So if you're then seeing it echoed, if you're seeing it echoed in YA books as normal as well, then you're not, there's nothing to tell you that it's not okay.
That your parents really bad.
Yeah. So I agree with you on that I wouldn't want to communicate that a relationship was normal and healthy.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, which I think whenever I do have those parents that are not great, I think that, you know, there was one in the Arameth series who was like, you know, fringe, shown in flashback scenes or whatever. But he was clearly not great. It was never portrayed as healthy. But you're right that's another aspect of this to be aware of, that there's a lot of responsibility as a YA author and relationship dynamics in general, because you and I have our next video planned is about terrible relationship choices in YA books. So this will kind of flow into that. But yeah, there's a lot in YA that you really have to kind of think about, like, what message am I sending? What thematically, what is my book not teaching necessarily? Like, I don't think that's the right word. Communicating, I guess. Yeah. What am I promoting? What am I supporting without maybe realizing it?
Yeah.
So.
Because I mean, I've written a few books where intentionally I make the parents not be good parents, because that's pretty much the whole plot of the book, is like these children realizing this is a bad situation, and they have other adults who help them out of this situation, and it is very clear through the whole book that this parent-child relationship is very unhealthy and it's very abusive, and that it's not how anyone should expect their parent to treat them. And I wrote it that way on purpose. Like, that was the whole point of the series, was to illustrate these. And I even have in the back of the book, like, suicide prevention hotlines and, you know, information for children who are abused. Like, the whole point of it was to illustrate that this is a toxic relationship with a parent that you don't have to live with. And I think that when I read something that will make me stop reading a YA book like that is when the parent is that awful and it's never portrayed in the book as an escapable situation, or that it is what it is, and this kid just goes off and does whatever because the parent is horrible, terrible, and that's it. Like, there needs to be some transition between the main character understanding that this is a bad relationship and seeking help or escaping, and not jumping from one horrible relationship into making a horrible decision to go fight aliens on another planet, because that's equally bad decision. But does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
The motivation to be a catalyst, like, to change the way the person perceives their situation, not just perpetuate.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I like what you said about them, about other adults being involved in helping them get out of this abusive relationship, because then that's communicating it's not normal for the adults in your life to be untrustworthy. Like, there are trustworthy adults. And so it's creating that balance. Like, the contrast for a kid who is in that situation to see, okay, not all adults are this way, and maybe this isn't normal. So, and I think that's a healthy portrayal, even though, you know, maybe it's painful to read because the character is going through that, but it's a healthy portrayal because it's realistic, but it's also not promoting the idea that all adults are untrustworthy or that you don't need an adult. I think that's a healthy way of breaking that down for kids. Was that the Yellow Note series? Because I thought I remember there being.
No, that's the Demolition Project.
Demolition Project.
Second one, yeah. The first and second one are both. You know, she's in the first one, she was basically given up for adoption by an abusive parent, or a drug addicted parent, and then just every foster system she was in just wasn't ideal. So she was pretty much struggling on her own until an adult reached out and said, well, this is not how life is supposed to be. Let's, you know. But she definitely did a lot of things wrong through the whole book, and she knew they were wrong, but she couldn't necessarily figure out a better way of doing things until these adults stepped in and said, okay, well, we're going to show you, we're going to help you. And things turned around for her at that point. The Yellow Note, her parents are dead at the beginning, but she lives with her grandmother, and that really shapes the whole book. I mean, it's kind of the point of the whole book. So
I thought I remembered in the Yellow Note there being, because there was a big friend group, and there was one of the friends who, if I'm remembering correctly, didn't have a great home life or something, and would come and stay with
Sam. Sam's dad was a little bit crazy. Yeah. He was demanding. He was a little bit just, he wasn't a good guy. But he did.
This is something I find interesting about your books in particular, because you write a lot of family dynamics. Found family, it's not always biological family, but you tend to have large casts that include family members and friends and like a rich support network for the characters, which is not always typical of YA. There's a lot of YA books where it's like, it's just you and me and we have to be in love because there's no one else.
There's nobody else.
So it's interesting. It's interesting to read your books because there is that sense of support. Like, your characters are not alone in the world. They have these, they may not from the start of the story, but they build these support networks. Which is, it's a cool theme to put out there for teens, that you don't have to be alone facing what you're facing. Like, you can find a support network.
You gotta stop. You're gonna make me start wanting to write YA again right after I decided this.
You can do YA fantasy. You fantasy.
Yeah, and you can do that in fantasy too. I mean, the same support network, the same situation there.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about when I was saying that is your Grimm series, because that's the same thing that happens in Grimm.
There's parents all over the place in that thing.
Yeah, they get surrogate siblings. They've got aunts and uncles. Like, there's a whole family network that they develop over the course of the series as they kind of expand more into the world and meet people. It's like they're picking up family members as they go.
I mean, that cast is over 100 characters, so that follow it through. I mean, they pick them up as they go, but by the end, there's like over 100 or so characters.
Yeah, but that's a cool dynamic, because it does communicate the fact that these characters are not facing their struggles alone. There's always people who care about them, that they can go to for help. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, any final thoughts you wanted to add about, I don't need to tell my parents, I can handle this on my own?
Not really. Except that if you think you don't need to tell your parents, you probably need to tell your parents.
That maybe just, as a takeaway, maybe, maybe that's a good moment to just kind of pause and question your life choices, just to make sure that, if you're hiding things from your parents, it might be, not always, it might be because the choices you're making are not solid. So you might just want to pause and think about that.
Because
you're watching this.
Instant gratification does not equate long-term good choices. I don't know any other way to say that. It might be great right now. I might regret it in like 5 years or so.
Yes. And the exception to this would be if you are in an abusive or unhealthy, toxic relationship with your parents, in which case there may be some things you shouldn't tell them, but that you should find another trustworthy adult to talk to. So if you're a teen watching this, this is our PSA. There are trustworthy adults in the world that you can reach out to. You don't have to do it on your own, and probably would be better if you didn't. So, well, this has been a trope talk about the YA trope of, I don't need to tell my parents, I've got this totally under control. I think our next video is going to be about just horrible relationship choices in YA. horrible relationship decisions. So it'll kind of spin off of this one, but focusing more on the choices that the characters themselves make about different things. So if you enjoyed this video and you want more trope talks, make sure that you like and subscribe our channel here. I'm also going to drop information in the description about MJ's books and my books so you know where to find everything if you want to learn more about this. So thank you for joining us.